In a luxury high-rise where tragedy whispers through the walls, shadows don't just watch, they creep closer, pulling you into their cold embrace. Fall from Above, submitted by Minh Nguyen. The expat arrived with the kind of eager excitement you'd expect from someone moving into a luxury condo for the first time. He had found the place online, drawn in by the sleek design and the high-rise views that promised to be nothing short of spectacular. The city buzzed with life below, but from the 25th floor, it felt like he was on top of the world. The condo manager, Minh Nguyen, greeted him with a warm smile as they finalized the lease in the modern, minimalist lobby. Minh had been working at the building for just under a year, but already he knew all the tenants by name. He prided himself on keeping things professional, and the building itself was known for its security, high-end amenities, and tight-lipped staff. No one ever spoke about the things that happened behind closed doors. "So, how do you like the place so far?" Minh asked as he handed over the keys. "It's perfect," the expat replied, looking around with satisfaction. "Can't believe I got such a good deal for a place like this." Minh smiled politely but said nothing. It wasn't his place to explain why the rent had been reduced recently. Some things were better left unsaid, especially in a building like this. The expat didn't know about the previous tenant. No one had mentioned the woman who had lived there before him, the one who had jumped from the very balcony he now stood on, staring out at the city lights below. It had been months ago, but the memory still lingered in the building's walls, in the whispers of the night. The first few weeks went by uneventfully. The expat settled into his new life, enjoying the luxurious surroundings and the peace that came from being so high above the bustling streets. But then, things started to change. It began with the lights. At first, it was just a flicker, a momentary dimming that he barely noticed. But soon, the flickers became more frequent, more insistent. The lights would pulse, casting strange shadows on the walls, and then return to normal as if nothing had happened. Then there were the cold drafts. Despite the weather being warm, the air inside the apartment would sometimes turn icy for no reason. He could feel it brush against his skin, like someone was walking past him, but he'd turn around and see nothing. He mentioned it to Minh in passing one day, but the manager brushed it off. "Old wiring," Minh said with a casual shrug. "It happens in these buildings sometimes, nothing to worry about." But the expat wasn't so sure. He started noticing other things, small, unsettling things. The air in the apartment felt heavier at night, and sometimes, when he was drifting off to sleep, he could swear he heard faint sounds, like footsteps, coming from the balcony. But whenever he checked, the balcony door was securely locked, and the city was quiet. Objects started moving. He'd leave his keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them later on the dining table. At first, he thought he was just being forgetful, but then he started finding things in places they shouldn't be. His watch inside the fridge, the remote on the bathroom sink. It felt like someone was messing with him. The dreams started not long after that. They were always the same, falling, endlessly falling. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, and for a moment, he could feel the sensation of weightlessness, as though he had just stepped off the edge of something high. One evening, as he stood on the balcony, looking out over the twinkling city, he felt a chill run down his spine. The air was warm, but there was something about the space that felt wrong, like he wasn't alone. He stepped back inside, sliding the door shut behind him, and tried to shake off the feeling. The next morning, the balcony door was open, even though he distinctly remembered locking it the night before. That night, the dreams came again, but this time they were worse. He dreamt of the balcony, of standing on the edge, teetering as though some unseen force was urging him forward. He woke up with a start, his pulse racing, and for a brief moment he swore he could feel someone standing behind him, watching him. He couldn't shake the unease. The next morning, he went to Minh. "There's something off about that place," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The lights keep flickering, and I keep having these weird dreams. Things are moving around, and this morning the balcony door was open." Minh hesitated, the polite smile fading from his face. "Look, it's an old building," he said carefully. "Sometimes strange things happen, but nothing that should be too concerning." The expat didn't push it. But that night, things escalated. He had just settled into bed when the flickering started again. But this time it wasn't just the lights. The air in the room grew cold, unnaturally cold. The expat sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around him. The silence felt oppressive, and then there it was again, that faint sound of footsteps, this time louder, coming from the balcony. He didn't want to look, but something compelled him. He slowly made his way to the glass door, heart pounding, and slid it open just enough to peer outside. The balcony was empty, but there was something else, a feeling like a presence hovering just out of sight. The air smelled faintly of perfume, and suddenly the expat knew. He wasn't the first person to stand on this balcony, feeling this fear. Panic surged through him as he slammed the door shut, locking it. He stumbled back to the bed, but the sense of dread wouldn't leave him. The TV turned on by itself, the screen flickering with static. He fumbled for the remote, but found it on the other side of the room, nowhere near where he had left it. And then, the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but as he stood frozen in the middle of the room, the whispers grew louder. Words he couldn't make out, but they seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls, the ceiling, the floor. He didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, he did some digging. It wasn't hard to find. A simple search brought up the news article. Woman found dead after falling from a condo balcony, 25th floor. No foul play suspected. The date of her death matched the vacancy of the apartment he now called home. When he confronted Minh, the manager's face grew pale. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" the expat demanded. Minh glanced around the empty lobby, lowering his voice. "Look, we couldn't exactly advertise that, could we? It's bad for business." "Bad for business? She died right outside my window." "I know," Minh said, his voice barely a whisper. "But she didn't just die. She jumped." That night, the expat packed his bags. The lease wasn't worth it. No view in the world could make up for the feeling of someone or something watching him from the shadows. As he left the building, he couldn't help but glance up at the 25th floor, at the balcony where the woman had jumped. The lights in the apartment flickered one last time, and for a brief moment he thought he saw a figure standing there, looking down at him. He didn't look back.